who lives in a pineapple under the sea. You already finished it, didn't you? I did too, and I wasn't even trying. That's the strange thing about SpongeBob SquarePants. It's been sitting in the back of nearly everyone's head for so long that the theme song feels less like a jingle and more like something the culture just knows, the way it knows Happy Birthday. You don't remember learning it, it's simply there. And I've found myself thinking about it lately in a way that I didn't quite expect. Not about the gags, though the gags are good. Not about the memes, though there are enough of those to sink a ship. I've been thinking about the fact that the most cheerful, most relentlessly sunny cartoon that television has ever produced was made by a marine biologist. A man who taught tide pool ecology to school children, and then, somewhere along the way, decided the best use of all that knowledge was a square sponge who works at a burger restaurant and is happier than any of us have ever been about anything. There's something in that. I'm not sure I can tell you exactly what yet. That's sort of why we're here. So here's the shape of the next while. It's a long, easy wander through the ideas tucked underneath a kid's show that turned out to be far stranger and far deeper than it ever needed to be. Not one big argument with a tidy conclusion at the end. More a set of different ways of being alive, each one worn by a different character in a small underwater town, and each one, if you sit with it long enough, quietly worth thinking about. We'll take our time. There's no rush and nowhere to be. I'll say up front why this makes decent sleep listening, because it's a fair question. SpongeBob, the character, has no urgency in him at all. He is warm without being loud, in his own way, at least when you strip out the sound effects. And sitting with a creature that, comfortable in his own skin, for a couple of hours, tends to settle the mind more than you'd think. Nothing here needs solving. Nothing here is going to leap out and grab you. Just a yellow sponge, a grumpy octopus, a starfish under a rock, and a handful of old philosophers who would have had a lot to say about all three. If you feel like subscribing before you nod off, that's a kind thing to do, and it costs you nothing, but there's genuinely no obligation either way. Let's head down there. Let's start with the man, because he's the part of this story that most people don't know, and he's honestly my favourite part of it. Steven Hillenburg grew up in Southern California and fell for the ocean early. As a teenager, he went snorkeling for the first time off Laguna Beach, and by his own account, something just clicked. He wanted to be a marine biologist. But he also loved to draw, and he spent a good while assuming those two things were separate lives he'd have to pick between. His teachers, bless them, apparently told him to just draw fish, which he found a bit boring as a suggestion. He wanted to make weird little paintings, not labelled diagrams. So he did the sensible thing first. He studied marine biology, got his degree, and went off to teach at a place then called the Orange County Marine Institute down in Dana Point. He taught kids about tide pools, nautical history, diversity, adaptation, the small strange creatures that live in the shallows and get left behind when the water pulls back. And here's the detail I love. One of the education directors asked him to make a comic book to teach the students with, and he made one called The Intertidal Zone, full of talking sea creatures. One of them was a sponge. Not the square fellow we know yet, but a real blobby, scientifically accurate sea sponge who acted as the comic's host. That comic never got published. It just sat there, quietly, being the seed of everything. There's another job in his history that matters just as much, and it's a much less glamorous one. During some of his summers, Hillenburg worked as a fry cook and a lobster boiler at a seafood restaurant up in Maine. Flipping food, working the grill, the whole thing. Hold on to that, because when you find out later that SpongeBob's entire identity is wrapped up in being a fry cook who adores his job at a burger joint, you realise the man wasn't inventing that from nothing. He was drawing on a real memory of what it feels like to stand at a grill. That's his own past cooking in that kitchen. Eventually, he admitted to himself that he was more interested in the art than the science, which must have been a strange thing to admit after building a whole career on the other side of it. He went off to the California Institute of the Arts to study experimental animation. He made short films. One of them, called Wormholes, won an award, and that got him a job on a Nickelodeon show called Rocko's Modern Life, which is where a lot of the SpongeBob crew first came together, and where he met a voice actor named Tom Kenny. Keep that name in mind, we'll come back to him. When Rocko's ended, Hillenburg pulled that old Tide Pool comic back out and started turning it into a series. Small fun detail that I can't resist. The character was very nearly not called SpongeBob at all. Hillenburg wanted to name him SpongeBoy, and the show was going to be SpongeBoy Ahoy. But the legal people found out the name SpongeBoy was already taken, apparently by a mop or a line of pencils, depending on who you ask. So he had to change it. He decided he still needed the word sponge in there, purely so that people wouldn't look at this square yellow thing and assume it was a slice of cheese, which is a genuinely funny problem to have to solve. And that's how we got SpongeBob. The SquarePants, by the way, came from Tom Kenny looking at the character and saying something like, "Look at this sponge in SquarePants thinking he can get a job in a fast food place." The name was basically an insult that stuck. The show went out in 1999 and did the thing almost nothing does. It just kept going. It's still going now, which we'll get to properly later, but I'll leave it there for the moment because the longevity isn't really the point of this section. What I want to sit with is the quality that a television critic once put his finger on, better than I could. He said the show felt like a breath from a time before irony, that there was nothing in it trying to be hip or cool or winking at the adults in the room. It was, in his words, deliberately naive. And because it wasn't trying to be clever, cleverness sort of attached itself to it anyway. I think that's exactly right, and I think it comes straight from Hillenburg, a man who spent years crouched over tide pools, genuinely delighted by hermit crabs, is not a cynical man. You can't fake that kind of enthusiasm, and the whole show runs on it. One last thing, because it makes me smile every time. In 2011, a group of scientists discovered a new species of mushroom in Borneo and named it Spongiforma SquarePantsi, an actual mushroom in the actual scientific record named after the cartoon. Hillenburg was reportedly delighted, which of course he was. The marine biologist who became a cartoonist got to have a real organism named after his made-up sponge. The two halves of his life, the science and the silliness, shaking hands. You couldn't script it better. Well, he sort of did, so that's where it comes from. Not a boardroom, not a focus group, a tide pool teacher who couldn't decide whether to be a scientist or an artist, and eventually stopped choosing and let the two things become the same thing. There's a little lesson buried in that already, and we've barely started, but we'll come back around to the man at the very end. So for now, let's leave him at his happiest, sketching sea creatures for kids who didn't know they were looking at the future. Now let's talk a little about where all of this takes place, because the setting has a secret in it that most people who grew up with the show never notice, and I find it quietly fascinating. Bikini Bottom. The little city at the bottom of the sea where everyone lives. It's bright, it's cheerful, the buildings are shaped like boats and pineapples and one very smug Easter Island head. And the name, which sounds like nothing more than a cheeky pun, is actually pointing at something real. Bikini Bottom is named after Bikini Atoll, and Bikini Atoll is a real place, a ring of coral islands out in the Pacific, roughly halfway between Hawaii and the Philippines. It is also one of the most haunted stretches of ocean on the planet. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States used that atoll to test nuclear weapons. Not one or two, dozens of detonations out there in what had been somebody's home. The people who lived on Bikini were moved off their islands beforehand, told it was temporary, and then essentially never got to properly go back, because the contamination doesn't wash away on any timescale that means anything to a human life. One of the tests, in 1954, was so much bigger than expected that it became a genuine disaster, spreading fallout across the region. The same nuclear tests, as it happens, are part of what inspired the original Godzilla film over in Japan. And in a much lighter footnote to the same history, the swimsuit got its name from the atoll too, because the designer thought his little two-piece would be as explosive as the bomb. Grim origin for a beach outfit when you think about it. So here's the thing. When Hillenburg's team named the town Bikini Bottom and placed it directly beneath Bikini Atoll, that was not an accident. And for years there was a fan theory floating around that the whole show is secretly post-nuclear. That the reason these sea creatures can talk and drive boats and play the clarinet is that they're mutations. And the reason the world is the way it is that the world above the water is gone. Just gone. And Bikini Bottom is what's left. For a long time that was just a theory. Then a little while back, one of the show's longtime writers, the man who voices Plankton, actually confirmed a version of it in an interview. He said that early on when they were building the concept, there was genuinely a sense of how far are we taking this. The idea that the whole world upstairs is dead, and this bright little town at the bottom of the sea is the thing that survived. Another cast member said he'd spent years telling people the theory wasn't true, and was rather startled to be told, no, actually, it is. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not trying to ruin anyone's childhood at 1 a.m. The show itself has never really committed to this. Humans show up upstairs in plenty of episodes. There's a whole bit where a man in a rowboat drops his pencil into the sea. The show's relationship with its own continuity is, to put it kindly, relaxed. It cares about being funny this week, far more than it cares about what it said 3 seasons ago. And I think that's the right call for what it is. So the apocalypse is more of an undercurrent than a fact. A little dark thread woven into the bright fabric. There if you want to pull on it. Invisible if you don't. But I do love that it's there, because it puts SpongeBob in surprisingly good company. A lot of the stories that really stick with us do this exact thing. They build something warm and colourful, and then let you slowly notice that it's sitting on top of something that ended. The candy-coloured world with the ruins underneath. And it changes how the cheerfulness lands, at least for me. If Bikini Bottom really is the little pocket of life that made it through the worst thing that ever happened, then all that relentless joy isn't naive. It's kind of heroic. SpongeBob getting up every morning genuinely thrilled to flip a burger in a town built in a blast crater is a creature choosing delight in a place that has every reason not to bother. I don't want to overcook it. It's a kids' show, and it mostly wants to make you laugh about a crab hoarding money. But that's the lovely thing about a good setting. It doesn't have to announce itself. It can just sit there, quietly doing work in the background, giving everything a faint flavour that you feel more than you notice. There's a nice small irony in here too, one that ties back to the man from the last section. Hillenburg spent his life caring about the ocean and the creatures in it. He raised awareness about marine life, got an award for it, the lot, and here he is naming his life's work after the single most notorious act of harm ever done to a patch of that same ocean. I don't think that's a contradiction. I think it might be the opposite. You put the beauty right on top of the wound, and you let people fall in love with the beauty, and maybe somewhere down the line, a few of them go and find out what's underneath. That's a very marine biologist way to smuggle something serious into a cartoon. Anyway, that's the ground we're standing on. Or floating above, I suppose. A bright town, a buried history, and a lot of creatures getting on with their small lives as if the world were brand new, which in a way for them it is. Let's go meet a few of them properly. So let's talk about the burger, or rather, let's talk about the sponge who makes the burger, because I think SpongeBob's job is the single most interesting thing about him, and it's the thing people are quickest to laugh off. Here is a creature who works at a fast food restaurant called the Krusty Krab, for a boss who underpays him, making a product he does not own the recipe to, wearing a hat he was told to wear. On paper, it's a bit bleak. It's the sort of job we'd tell a friend to get out of. And SpongeBob loves it. Not tolerates it, not makes the best of it, loves it, with his whole chest every single day, in a way that would be almost suspicious if it weren't so obviously genuine. He treats the Krabby Patty like it matters. He has opinions about the grill. He has a relationship with the spatula. There's a real craft in how the show draws his cooking, a kind of total absorption, and I think that's the key to the whole character. SpongeBob has found the thing that ancient philosophers spent a very long time trying to describe, and he found it flipping patties for minimum wage. The philosopher I keep reaching for here is Aristotle, and specifically an idea of his that gets translated as eudaimonia. It's usually rendered as happiness, but that's a bit weak. It's closer to flourishing, living well, being fully and actively the thing you are, and doing it well for its own sake. Aristotle's view, roughly, was that happiness isn't a feeling you chase. It's what happens as a side effect of living in accordance with your nature and doing it excellently. A knife flourishes by cutting well. A person flourishes by reasoning and acting well. And crucially, he thought the good life was one where the activity itself was the reward, not a means to some other reward. That's SpongeBob exactly. He doesn't cook to get paid. You can tell because Mr. Krabs barely pays him, and it changes nothing. He doesn't cook to become famous or to climb to some better position. He cooks because cooking, done with everything he's got, is simply what he is for. The Krabby Patty is not a stepping stone to anything. It's the point, and because it's the point, he's free in a way that most of us, quietly grinding toward the next thing, are not. There's a phrase that gets used about work, finding your calling, and it's become a bit of a cliche, the sort of thing that ends up on a mug. But strip the mug off it and there's something real there. A calling is work you would do even if the ladder were removed. Work that isn't waiting to become something else. Most of us have felt a flicker of it. An afternoon where the task in front of you was genuinely absorbing and you looked up and 2 hours had gone. SpongeBob lives in that flicker permanently. He never looks up and wonders whether this is beneath him because the question makes no sense to him. There is no beneath. There is only the patty, and the patty deserves his best. And I'll be honest, I find that genuinely enviable and a little bit convicting. It's very easy to be Squidward about your job, and we'll get to Squidward, don't worry. It's very easy to hold your own work at arm's length, to treat the thing you do all day as an embarrassing means to a weekend. SpongeBob doesn't do the arm's length thing. He collapses the distance entirely. He is his work while he's doing it, fully. And then he goes jellyfishing, fully. And the two don't resent each other. Now here's the part that ties back to the man who made him, and it's the reason I don't think this is an accident. Hillenburg was a fry cook. He stood at a real grill in a real seafood place in Maine, and by all accounts, didn't hate it. When he built SpongeBob's job out of his own memory, he could have made it a joke about drudgery. Loads of shows would have. The put-upon worker, the miserable shift, the clock watching. Instead, he made it a love story between a sponge and a spatula. That's a choice. That's a man saying, actually, there was something good in that job, something worth honouring, and I'm going to give it to my happiest creation. There's a lovely comparison to real life buried in this. The way our parents or grandparents sometimes talk about work they did with their hands. A trade, a craft, a shift job, and how there was a pride in it that doesn't always survive into the way we talk about work now. Not everyone had it, but the ones who did seem to have found the same thing SpongeBob has. The job wasn't the enemy. The job was where the day's meaning lived. I'm not going to pretend this solves anything. Most people can't just decide to adore their job, and plenty of jobs give you very little to adore. That's real, and I'm not waving it away. But there's a smaller, more portable version of the idea that I think anyone can carry. It's not that you have to love the work, it's that the quality of your attention while you're doing it is, to a surprising degree, up to you. SpongeBob's superpower isn't the job, it's the attention he brings to it. He shows up all the way, And a life made of showing up all the way, even to small things, especially to small things, turns out to be a pretty good life. We'll come back to attention more than once tonight, because it's sort of the quiet engine underneath a lot of what makes SpongeBob who he is. But for now, just picture him at the grill, delighted, absorbed, not going anywhere, not becoming anything, just being the best fry cook the bottom of the sea has ever seen, and genuinely, completely happy about it. There are worse things to fall asleep thinking about. There's an old Greek myth that I think about more than is probably healthy, and it turns out to fit a cartoon sponge disturbingly well. So let's sit with it for a while. The myth is about a man called Sisyphus. He was a king, or the wisest man alive, depending on who's telling it, and he managed to outsmart death itself for a while, which the gods took rather personally. So they gave him a punishment. He was made to roll an enormous boulder up a hill, and every time he got it near the top, the boulder would roll back down to the bottom, and he'd have to walk down after it and start again. Forever. Not for a year, not until he learned his lesson. Forever, with no end and no point. The purest possible image of pointless, endless labour. Now, thousands of years later, a French writer named Albert Camus picked up that myth and did something unexpected with it. In an essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, he used it as a picture of the whole human condition. His argument, very roughly, was that we are creatures who desperately want the universe to have meaning, and the universe just sits there, silent, refusing to hand us one. He called the gap between those two things the absurd. Not the universe being absurd, and not our longing being absurd, but the mismatch between them. The wanting to know why, met with no answer. And most of the essay is Camus asking, all right, given that, how do you live? And his famous answer, the last line, is that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. That's the whole turn. Sisyphus, condemned to the most meaningless task imaginable, can rob the gods of their victory by simply deciding that the rock is his, by knowing every ridge of it, owning the walk down the hill, refusing to be miserable about a fate designed to make him miserable. The struggle itself, Camus said, is enough to fill a person's heart. You make the boulder yours and suddenly the punishment stops working. I think you can see where I'm going. SpongeBob is Sisyphus with a spatula. He does the same thing every day. The patties come, he flips them, they get eaten, more patties come. Tomorrow, the same. Forever, presumably. It is, if you squint, exactly the boulder, a task with no end, that resets every morning, that leads nowhere. And SpongeBob is radiantly, uncomplicatedly happy inside it. He has, without ever reading a word of French philosophy, done precisely what Camus said was the only real answer to an absurd world. He has made the rock his own. He has decided that the repetition is not a trap, but a home. And here's the detail that makes it almost too perfect. He doesn't do it alone. He does it right next to Squidward, who is pushing the exact same boulder, in the exact same restaurant, and hating every second of it. Same rock, same hill. One of them has found a way to be happy, and the other is quietly dying inside. Camus basically wrote both of those characters into one essay, and then a cartoon put them at adjacent workstations, and let them argue about it for 25 years. Squidward is Sisyphus refusing the trick. SpongeBob is Sisyphus who figured it out. They are the two possible endings to the same story, standing 3 feet apart. Now I should be fair because there's a sharper reading of all this and I don't want to hide it from you. Some people look at SpongeBob's endless, cheerful labour and see something a lot less inspiring. They see a worker who's been so thoroughly conditioned that he mistakes his own exploitation for joy. On this view, he's not an absurd hero at all. He's the perfect employee, the dream of every boss who'd like the staff to love the grind and never ask for a raise. Mr. Krabs underpays him precisely because he can. SpongeBob will never revolt because he's genuinely thrilled to be there. Read that way. The happiness isn't triumph, it's a symptom, And I think that reading is worth taking seriously, honestly. Both things can be a little bit true at once. It is possible to have found genuine meaning in your work and also to be getting a raw deal from the person who profits off it. Those don't cancel out. SpongeBob can be an absurd hero who has mastered the art of being happy inside repetition, and also a bloke who really ought to be paid more. The show, being a comedy, mostly lets the second thing be a joke and the first thing be the heart. But I like that the tension is there, because it keeps SpongeBob from being a simple little lesson about smiling through anything. Real life has both. The rock can be yours, and the game can still be rigged. What I keep landing on, though, is that the choice Camus describes is available regardless of the rigging. That's almost the whole point. Sisyphus can't change his sentence. The gods aren't negotiating. What he can change is whether he walks down that hill in despair or with something like peace. And that inner move, the deciding, is the one thing no one can take off him. SpongeBob has that same inner freedom, and he exercises it every morning without a second thought. He's decided the rock is his, the patty is his, the day is his. There's a version of this you can carry out of the water with you, and it's not the shallow one about positive thinking. It's smaller and tougher than that. Most of what we do repeats. The commute repeats. The washing up repeats. The small maintenance of being a person repeats endlessly and leads, in the grand scheme, nowhere in particular. You can experience all of that as a boulder rolling back down the hill, or you can, some days at least, own the walk down. Not pretend it's thrilling. Just own it. SpongeBob owns it completely, which is why he never looks like a man being punished, even though, on paper, he's doing the most punishing job in the sea. So if you take Camus at his word, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. It turns out we don't have to imagine very hard. He's yellow, he's square, and he's grinning at a grill somewhere at the bottom of the Pacific right now. I want to defend Squidward for a bit, because I think he gets a rough deal, and I think he's secretly the most human character in the whole show. Squidward Tentacles lives between two of the happiest creatures in the sea and works next to one of them, and he is miserable, properly miserable. Not cartoon grumpy for a gag, though it is often played for a gag. There's a real, settled unhappiness in him. He wants to be a great artist. He plays the clarinet badly, though he'd dispute that. He paints, mostly self-portraits. He believes deep down that he is a refined and talented soul who has been dropped by cruel fate into a life of frying burgers next to an idiot. And nothing he does ever closes the gap between the life he thinks he deserves and the life he's got. There's a philosopher who described Squidward's inner world with almost eerie precision, about 150 years before Squidward existed, and his name was Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was, and I say this with affection, the great pessimist. His view of existence was bleak, in a way that's almost bracing. He thought that underneath everything, driving all of us, there's a blind, restless force he called the will. Just endless striving, wanting and wanting and wanting. And here's the cruel part of his picture. When you don't get the thing you want, you suffer, obviously. But when you do get it, the satisfaction lasts about 5 minutes, and then the wanting simply relocates to something else, and you're striving again. And in the gaps, when there's nothing to strive for, you don't get peace. You get boredom, which Schopenhauer thought was its own kind of torment. So life for him swings between suffering and boredom like a pendulum, and never really rests anywhere good. That is Squidward's whole existence. When he wants recognition and doesn't have it, he suffers. On the rare occasions he gets a taste of it, it evaporates almost instantly, and he's miserable again. And in between, stuck at the till with no customers, he's bored out of his mind. Suffering and boredom, back and forth, forever. Schopenhauer would have looked at Squidward and nodded grimly and said, "Yes, that's the one. That's what I was on about." But Schopenhauer didn't leave us with nothing. He thought there was one real escape from the tyranny of the will, one place where the endless wanting goes quiet. And that place is art. When you lose yourself in a piece of music, or stand in front of a painting and forget yourself completely, the striving stops for a moment. You're not wanting anything. You're just there, absorbed. He thought music especially was the highest of the arts because it seemed to speak the language of the will itself. And so, in his philosophy, art is the closest thing we get to relief, which makes Squidward's clarinet genuinely tragic and genuinely beautiful at the same time. Those tortured honking notes that everyone else in Bikini Bottom begs him to stop playing. That's not just a joke about a bad musician. That's a suffering creature, reaching for the one thing his own philosophy says might quiet the noise. He plays because for the length of a song, he's free. It doesn't matter that he's not very good. The point was never to be good. The point was the escape. And that reframes him entirely. For me, he's not a pretentious failure. He's a soul in pain doing the one thing that helps. There's an episode a lot of people remember where Squidward ends up completely alone. Through a series of daft events, he winds up in an empty white void. No SpongeBob, no Patrick, no customers, nothing. And at first he's delighted, because alone is all he's ever said he wanted. He even gets to play his clarinet in perfect peace. But it curdles fast. The emptiness gets to him. Being truly alone with nothing turns out to be unbearable, and he ends up desperate to get back to the very life he was always complaining about. It's a surprisingly heavy little story for a kids' show. It quietly suggests that Squidward's problem was never either people. His problem is inside him, and it follows him into the void. The thing he thought he wanted, total solitude, turns out to be the one thing worse than his actual life. And there's another one where he moves away entirely to a gated community full of other squids exactly like him. Same taste, same attitudes, same everything. Paradise on paper. And it drives him mad within days because a world made entirely of people like you turns out to be suffocating. And the monotony nearly breaks him. What eventually snaps him out of it is remembering SpongeBob and Patrick being joyfully stupid with a leaf blower. The very thing that annoyed him becomes the thing that saves him. There's a whole philosophy of other people buried in that. The idea that we actually need the friction of folk who aren't like us, that a life sounded perfectly smooth is a kind of death. I do want to give Squidward one clear win, because he gets so few. There's an episode where he's put in charge of a hopeless marching band, a total shambles of a group, and against everything. On the night, they're magnificent. They play brilliantly. Squidward stands there for once, having made something genuinely good, and the look on his face is pure, uncomplicated joy. It's rare. It might be the happiest we ever see him. And I think the show gives it to him on purpose, as if to say, look, he's not incapable of the things SpongeBob has. He gets there too once, when the striving and the doing line up just right. It just doesn't last, because for Squidward, it never does. Here's why I won't mock him in the end. Most of us are far more Squidward than SpongeBob, and we know it. We hold ideas of the life we should be living, and we feel the gap, and we get bored and we get frustrated, and we reach for whatever quiets the noise for an evening. Squidward is what it looks like to want more, and not get it, and not know how to stop wanting. That's not a flaw the show invented to laugh at. That's just most people, drawn as an octopus with a big nose. And the show, for all it teases him, never actually hates him. It keeps him around, keeps giving him his clarinet, keeps letting him have the occasional good night. That's about as much mercy as any of us can ask for, really. Here's a question to roll around in the dark. Is thinking overrated? Because there's a starfish who lives under a rock who seems to have quietly decided that it is, and he might be onto something. Patrick Star is SpongeBob's best friend, and he is, by any conventional measure, not very bright. He lives under an actual rock. His favourite activity is sleeping, and his second favourite activity appears to be doing nothing with tremendous commitment. He rarely plans. He rarely worries. When a thought does arrive, it tends to arrive alone and slightly confused, look around and leave again. And here's the thing that nags at me. Patrick is almost never unhappy. Now, the easy read on Patrick is that he's the dumb one, the comic relief, ignorance played for laughs. And sure, a lot of the time that's exactly what he is. But sit with him a bit longer, and a genuine philosophical question starts to poke through, one that people have been arguing about for a very long time. Is the good life the examined one, full of thought and reflection and self-improvement? Or is all that examining actually a kind of affliction, and the truly contented creatures are the ones who never picked the habit up? Socrates famously planted his flag hard on one side of this. The unexamined life, he said, is not worth living. For Socrates, the whole point of being human was to question, to dig, to refuse to just drift along on unthought assumptions. By that standard, Patrick is barely living at all. He examines nothing. He drifts magnificently. But there's a whole other tradition, mostly from the East, that would look at Patrick and see something closer to a sage. In Taoism, there's an idea called Wu Wei, which roughly means effortless action or not forcing. The notion that a lot of our striving and calculating actually gets in the way, and that the wisest thing is often to stop grasping and let things unfold. The old Taoist writers loved to praise the useless. There's a story about a gnarled, twisted tree that's no good for timber, and precisely because it's useless, nobody chops it down, so it lives long and grows huge and gives shade to everyone. The uselessness is the whole point. It's what keeps it safe and free. Patrick is that tree. He is gloriously, load-bearingly useless, and he is completely untroubled by it. He's not lying under his rock feeling like he's wasting his potential, because the concept of wasting your potential requires a kind of anxious, forward-looking calculation that Patrick simply does not run. He's just there, being a starfish, and there's a real peace in him that all of Squidward's refinement never gets close to. The show actually tests this directly in one episode, and it's one of my favourites for exactly this reason. Patrick somehow gets clever, genuinely intelligent, big words, sharp thoughts, the works. And you'd think that would be an upgrade. It is a catastrophe. As soon as Patrick can think properly, he becomes insufferable, and more to the point, miserable. The cleverer he gets, the less happy he is, until he's this anxious, superior, joyless thing that nobody wants around, least of all himself. And the resolution is that he loses the intelligence and goes cheerfully back to being a happy idiot, and everyone, including Patrick, is enormously relieved. The episode is basically a comedy about the curse of self-awareness. It quietly suggests that Patrick's stupidity isn't a lack. It's a kind of protection. It's the thing standing between him and the low-grade dread that a thinking creature carries around all day. I find that genuinely provocative, and I don't think it's just a gag. There's real research and real old wisdom pointing at the idea that a certain amount of rumination, of turning things over and over in your head, is closely tied to being unhappy. The mind left to churn tends to churn toward worry, and the people who seem most at peace are often not the cleverest in the room. They're the ones who've somehow escaped the trap of constant self-monitoring. Patrick never entered the trap in the first place. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you the answer is to become as dim as possible. That would be a strange message, and also, I don't think it's true. Patrick's contentment comes at a real cost. He can't create anything much. He can't help his friends think through a problem. He's not going to have Squidward's rare transcendent night with the marching band, because he doesn't have the equipment for it. There's a trade. The examined life gives you the clarinet and the painting and the occasional real triumph. And it also gives you the gap and the boredom and the 3 in the morning worries. The unexamined life gives you none of the triumph and none of the torment. You pay for peace with depth, or you pay for depth with peace. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, wishing we could have both. which of course you can't. What I think Patrick offers, more usefully than a lifestyle to copy, is a permission. Permission to notice how much of our unhappiness is self-generated, how much of it is the mind doing laps it didn't need to do. You don't have to move under a rock to borrow a little of Patrick's gift. You can just, occasionally, catch yourself mid-churn and think, actually, none of this thinking is helping, and put it down for a while. Patrick lives permanently, in the state the rest of us can only visit. Lying on the sofa, on a slow afternoon. No plans, no worries, no examining, just pleasantly there. He's not wasting his life in those moments. He might be the only one of them getting it completely right. There's a warmth to Patrick too, which I don't want to skip past because pure simplicity could easily be cold, and his isn't. He's loyal, he's affectionate, he's delighted by his friend's happiness. He may not think much, but what little he feels generously. And maybe that's the real trick of him. He's cleared out all the anxious mental furniture, and what's left in the empty room is just kindness and naps. You could do a lot worse than that. I've met plenty of much cleverer creatures who'd struggle to say the same. Since we've just spent a while under Patrick's rock, let's stay with him and SpongeBob a little longer, because the friendship between those two is one of the loveliest things in the show. And it turns out an old philosopher thought friendship was pretty much the whole game. Epicurus is another one who's been badly misunderstood over the centuries. His name gave us the word Epicurean, which now suggests fine wine and expensive dinners and a general life of luxury. The real Epicurus lived on bread and cheese and water and thought elaborate pleasures were more trouble than they were worth. What he actually taught was that the good life is a simple one, mostly free of pain and anxiety, rich in modest pleasures. And right at the very top of his list of what makes life worth living, above money, above status, above nearly everything, he put friendship. He reckoned that, of all the things wisdom provides for a happy life, by far the greatest is friendship. He didn't mean networking, he meant the real thing. People you can be completely at ease with. SpongeBob and Patrick are the real thing. And what I love about their friendship is how little it's actually about. They don't have deep conversations. They're not helping each other grow or holding each other accountable or any of the things we're told good friendships are supposed to do these days. They just enjoy being near each other, doing nothing much. And that, I think, is closer to the truth of friendship than all the self-improvement stuff. The best friendships aren't projects. They're just ease. There's an episode that captures this perfectly, and it involves a cardboard box. SpongeBob gets a new toy, and the toy comes in a big box, and he promptly ignores the toy entirely because the box, he explains, can become anything you imagine. And so the two of them climb into an empty cardboard box and have, as far as they're concerned, the adventure of their lives purely through imagination. From the outside to Squidward, watching in disbelief, it's two grown creatures sitting silently in a box, making sound effects with their mouths. From the inside, it's a roller coaster, a pirate ship, whatever they decide. Squidward cannot for the life of him understand it, and eventually gets so maddened trying to figure out the trick that he climbs into a box himself to see what he's missing, and of course gets nothing, because there was never a trick. There was just two friends, and a shared imagination, and the willingness to go somewhere together, for free. That's the whole thing, really. The box is empty. The magic is entirely in the fact that they're in it together, and they both agree to believe in it. On your own, a cardboard box is just a box. With the right person in it with you, it's anything. And I think most of us can point to a friendship like that in our own lives, or wish we could. The friend where the activity genuinely does not matter. You could be doing the most boring thing in the world, sitting in traffic, waiting for a kettle, and it's fine. It's better than fine because of who's there. That's Epicurus's greatest good, drawn as a sponge and a starfish in a box. There's a loyalty underneath the daftness too, and it shows up when it counts. Patrick isn't much use in a crisis, on paper, but he shows up, When SpongeBob is genuinely down, Patrick is there, in his clumsy way, not trying to fix it, just present. And SpongeBob does the same for him. Neither of them keeps score. That's another quiet marker of the real thing, I reckon. In a proper friendship, nobody's running the tab. You don't help because you're owed, and you don't resent giving because you're not expecting it back. It just flows both ways, without anyone measuring. And crucially, they let each other be exactly what they are. SpongeBob never tries to make Patrick less lazy. Patrick never tries to make SpongeBob less intense. There's no low-level project to improve one another, which honestly is where a lot of real relationships quietly go wrong. They've each looked at the other, in full naps and hyperactivity and all, and gone, yes, that one, that's my friend, no notes. There's a rare kind of acceptance in that. Most of us are at least a little bit managing the people close to us, nudging them toward the version we'd prefer. SpongeBob and Patrick have skipped that entirely. They just delight in the actual creature in front of them. I think that's why the friendship feels so easy to be around, and why it settles you at the end of a long day. There's no tension in it, no unspoken resentment, no keeping up appearances, no fear that one wrong move ends it. It's the friendship equivalent of an old jumper, completely comfortable, been through everything, not going anywhere. An Epicurus would tell you that's not a small thing you've settled for. That's the biggest thing there is. He built an entire philosophy of happiness and put friendship at the summit of it. And here's a cartoon proving him right with two idiots in a cardboard box. One more small thing, since we're being soft about it. Friendship like this doesn't require you to be impressive. SpongeBob doesn't have to perform for Patrick, and Patrick certainly isn't performing for anyone. They're not their best selves around each other in the polished sense. They're their actual selves, which is a different and much rarer thing. Being fully at ease, fully unguarded, with another creature who's seen all of it and stuck around anyway. If you've got even one friendship like that, you're doing better than a lot of very successful people. And if you're lucky enough to be drifting off tonight near someone like that, or even just thinking of one, that's a good thing to hold on to as you go. There's a scene the show keeps coming back to. Mr. Krabs alone in his office after the restaurant has closed, counting his money. Not spending it, not planning anything with it, just counting over and over, and it's about the happiest he ever looks. Eugene Krabs, owner of the Krusty Krab, one of the great misers in cartoon history, and I'd argue one of its loneliest creatures, though he'd sooner boil himself than admit it. Mr. Krabs loves money the way SpongeBob loves burgers, which is to say, completely, physically, almost romantically. He counts it, he bathes in it, he cradles his first dollar like a family heirloom. He'll cut any corner and squeeze any coin. There are episodes where his greed tips into genuinely alarming territory, working his staff to the bone, refusing to spend a penny on anything that isn't strictly necessary, and several things that are. On the surface, he's a simple figure, the greedy capitalist, the boss who profits off SpongeBob's joy and Squidward's misery, and pays them as little as he can get away with. Now, you could defend all this, and some people do. There's a reading of Mr. Krabs where the greed isn't a flaw at all, but the thing that holds the whole town up. And it leans on Ayn Rand and her idea of rational self-interest. Her view, put simply, was that selfishness gets an unfair reputation, that a person's primary moral duty is to their own flourishing and success, and that the pursuit of your own gain, far from being a vice, is what actually builds things. On that reading, Mr. Krabs isn't a villain at all. He's an engine. His relentless pursuit of profit is the very thing that keeps the Krusty Krab open, which gives SpongeBob the job he adores, and Squidward the job he loathes, and the whole town the burger it can't live without. No greedy crab, no restaurant. His self-interest, the argument goes, quietly serves everyone around him, whether he intends it to or not. I'll be honest, I find that reading half convincing at best, and I think the show does too. Because if you watch enough of it, you start to notice that Mr. Krabs' money love isn't really the confident, life-affirming thing Rand would want it to be. It looks a lot more like a hole he's trying to fill. He has no partner. His friendships are thin. The money seems to sit in the place where relationships would go, standing in for something it can never actually be. There's a whole way of thinking about this, that when someone clutches at wealth like that, the wealth has become a substitute, a stand-in for connection or safety or worth. And that's a much sadder and more interesting Mr. Krabs than the cheerful capitalist engine. A creature who's mistaken having for being loved. But here's the crack in the caricature, and it's the reason I can't write him off, and I don't think you're meant to. Pearl. Mr. Krabs has a daughter, a teenage whale, which raises questions about his personal life that the show very wisely never answers. And Pearl is the one thing he values as much as his money. Genuinely as much. When it comes down to a real choice between his fortune and his daughter, the fortune loses. Every time it matters, it loses. And that single fact rescues him from being a simple cautionary tale, because it means the greed isn't the whole story. There's a soft centre in there. He's a miser everywhere except the one place that counts. And in that one place, he's just a dad who'd give it all up for his kid. I find that genuinely touching and a bit clever on the show's part, because it means Mr. Krabs isn't a lesson about how money is bad. It's something subtler. He's a creature who knows deep down what actually matters. He's proved it. He'd burn the lot for Pearl, and yet he spends nearly all of his days chasing the thing that doesn't matter anyway. He has his priorities right in the one emergency, and completely upside down every ordinary Tuesday. Which, if I'm honest, is most of us. Ask anyone what they truly care about, and they'll tell you the people they love, without hesitation. Then watch how they actually spend their hours, their attention, their worry. There's usually a gap. Mr. Krabs just has a bigger and funnier version of the gap we've all got. There's an old bit of wisdom that runs through a lot of traditions, the idea that money makes a decent servant and a terrible master. It's fine as a tool. It buys the flour for the patties. It keeps the lights on. It goes wrong when it stops being the means and becomes the end, when you start serving it instead of it serving you. Mr. Krabs has, for the most part, got that relationship backwards. The money isn't in service of a good life for him. His life is in service of the money, and you can see the cost of it if you look past the jokes. He's often quite lonely, this crab, rattling around a restaurant, richer than anyone and connected to almost no one but his daughter, and grudgingly the sponge he refuses to pay properly. So I don't hate Mr. Krabs, and I don't think the show wants me to. I think it wants me to feel a bit sorry for him. The way you feel sorry for anyone who's confused the scoreboard for the game. He's not evil, he's just aimed himself at the wrong target and can't quite stop, even though he clearly knows, when it counts, where the real treasure is. It's got a whale's name, and it calls him Dad. Everything else is just shiny coins in a safe. He'd tell you the coins are what he loves. But watch what he does when Pearl needs him, and you'll know better. So in the end, does he? Across the road from the Krusty Krab, in a much smaller and much emptier restaurant, there's a creature the size of a fingernail who has organised his entire existence around one thing he will almost certainly never get. And I think he might be the most quietly philosophical character in the whole show, though he'd hate to hear it put so gently. Plankton, Sheldon J. Plankton, to give him his full name, owner of the failing chum bucket, and Mr. Krabs' lifelong rival. His whole life has a single purpose. He wants the secret formula for the Krabby Patty. That's it. That's the engine of him. If he could just steal that recipe, he believes, he'd finally beat Krabs, finally fill his restaurant, finally win. And so he schemes endlessly. The running joke is that he's tried so many plans he's run through the entire alphabet of them and started again. Plan A, Plan B, all the way down, over and over, each one failing in some new and humiliating way. And here's what fascinates me. On the rare occasions Plankton actually gets close, even the times he technically gets his hands on the formula, It never works out. Something always slips. He never actually gets to keep the win, which starts to feel less like bad luck and more like the entire point of the character. Plankton isn't really a creature who wants the formula. He's a creature who wants. The formula is just the shape his wanting happens to have taken. If he ever truly got it, he'd need a new thing to chase by the following morning, because the chasing is what he's made of. There are two ways to read this, and they come from opposite ends of the world, and I think both are true at once. The first is Nietzsche and his idea of the will to power. Nietzsche thought that the deepest drive in living things isn't comfort or even survival. It's the urge to grow, to overcome, to impose yourself on the world and expand. And there's a genuinely Nietzschean reading of Plankton where his relentless scheming isn't pathetic at all. It's magnificent in a way. This tiny creature, mocked by everyone, refuses to accept his station. He will not be small. He keeps hurling himself at a wall 1,000 times his size, plan after plan, defeat after defeat, and he simply never stops. There's a strange grandeur in that refusal to give up, if you're willing to see it. A one-celled organism with the ambition of an emperor. The second reading comes from Buddhism, and it's less flattering but maybe truer. In Buddhist thought, there's a concept often translated as craving, sometimes as thirst. The word is tanha, and the core teaching is that this craving, this endless thirst for things to be other than they are, is the actual root of suffering. Not the world being bad, the wanting being bottomless. Because craving has a cruel structure. Getting the thing doesn't end it. It just resets it onto the next thing. The thirsty mind stays thirsty no matter how much it drinks. And the only real freedom in that tradition isn't getting everything you crave. It's loosening the grip of the craving itself. Plankton is a perfect little illustration of tanha. His suffering doesn't come from the world, it comes entirely from the wanting. He has a restaurant, he has a home. He's not, in any objective sense, in danger. Every bit of his misery is self-generated, poured out of that one bottomless desire for a thing he's decided he needs and doesn't actually need at all. If he could just put the wanting down, he'd be fine. He'd be more than fine. But he can't, because the wanting is the only self he knows. And I want to be careful to keep him distinct from Squidward here, because on the surface they both look like unhappy creatures who want more, but they're suffering from different diseases. Squidward's ache is diffuse, a general dissatisfaction with existence, a boredom and a longing with no single target. The whole restless machinery we talked about earlier. Plankton's is laser-focused. It has a name and an address. It's one specific object he's convinced himself is the key to everything. Squidward wants a better life in general. Plankton wants that recipe in particular. One is a fog, the other is an obsession. An obsession at least has a direction, which is maybe why Plankton seems weirdly more energized by his misery than Squidward is drained by his. Then there's Karen, and this for me is the saddest and most human detail of the whole thing. Karen is Plankton's wife. She's a computer, which is a very SpongeBob sort of arrangement. And she's clearly the smartest character in that building by a wide margin. She comes up with half his plans, sees through his nonsense, and sticks around anyway. Karen is, in every meaningful sense, a partner, a genuine relationship, right there in the room. The one good thing Plankton actually has. And he barely notices because he's too busy staring across the road at a recipe. He has love sitting at his own control panel, and he's ignoring it to chase a burger he can't have. If that isn't a picture of misplaced wanting, I don't know what is. The thing he craves is unreachable and worthless. The thing he's got is right there and priceless, and he's got them exactly the wrong way round. I don't think the show is trying to teach a lesson with Plankton exactly. It's mostly trying to make you laugh at a tiny green villain failing again. but the pattern is so clean that the philosophy leaks out anyway. Here is a creature who has everything he needs to be content and cannot be content because he's hooked on the one thing he lacks. And the tragedy, the very small, very funny tragedy of him, is that even if he won, he'd lose. The formula was never going to fill the hole. Nothing was. The hole isn't formula shaped, it's just a hole, and he spent his whole life trying to pour a sandwich into it. Every good ensemble needs someone who doesn't quite belong, and Bikini Bottom's outsider is a squirrel from Texas who lives underwater on purpose, which, the more I think about it, is a genuinely strange and wonderful decision for a character to have made. Sandy Cheeks is a land creature. She can't breathe the water, so she lives inside a great glass dome with an oak tree in it, a little bubble of air and dry land at the bottom of the sea, and whenever she steps outside, she has to wear an astronaut suit with a helmet full of air. Think about what that actually means for a second. Every single day, just to walk out her front door and see her friends, Sandy has to put on survival gear. The whole world she's chosen to live in is for her mildly hostile at all times. One cracked helmet and she's in real trouble. And she does it anyway, cheerfully, because she wants to be there. She's also the scientist. In a town run on pure absurdity, where fires burn underwater and nothing obeys any physical law for longer than a punchline. Sandy is the one who believes in reason, in experiment, in evidence. She invents things, she runs tests, she's an expert in karate, which she treats with the same rigor she brings to everything else. She's the closest thing Bikini Bottom has to the Enlightenment, dropped into a place that operates entirely on cartoon logic, and doesn't much care what she thinks about it. And I love the tension that creates because it's a real one. Sandy is a rational mind living in an irrational world, and she never fully wins that argument because the world was never going to play fair. You can be the most sensible creature in the room, and it changes nothing if the room refuses to make sense. There's something almost heroic and a little bit lonely in that. The one who insists on figuring things out properly, surrounded by friends who are perfectly happy not to. She's not wrong to want understanding. She just doesn't get to have the satisfaction of the world agreeing with her. There's a homesickness in Sandy too, and the show is honest about it. She misses Texas. She talks about it constantly, sings its praises, gets genuinely emotional about home. There's an episode where she becomes so homesick and disillusioned that she decides to leave the sea and go back to land for good. And it takes her friends genuinely showing her that she's loved and wanted to make her stay. And that's the thing about Sandy that gets me. She's not stuck underwater. She chose it, and she keeps choosing it, even though she has a whole other home she aches for, and even though this one requires a spacesuit to survive. Every day she weighs it up, the dry, warm Texas she came from, against the cold, strange sea where her friends are. And every day she picks the friends. That's not nothing. That's a real, ongoing act of love, renewed constantly, at genuine personal cost. I think there's a quiet philosophy of the outsider in her, and it's more generous than the version we usually tell. We tend to romanticize the outsider as the lonely genius, misunderstood, above it all. Sandy isn't that. She's an outsider who threw herself all the way into a community that isn't built for her kind. She didn't stand at the edge being superior. She put on the helmet and dove in and made a home among creatures completely unlike herself, and got attached and stayed. That's a much harder and better version of being the odd one out. Not holding yourself apart, but belonging fully to a place that will always be a bit foreign to you. There's a stoic streak in her as well, if you want one. She lives with a permanent, low-level version of difficulty that she simply made peace with. The helmet, the dome, the fact that her environment could kill her. She doesn't complain about it much. She's adapted, built her systems, and got on with the actual business of her life. The inventing and the karate and the friendships. She's decided which parts of her situation she can control. Her preparation, her attitude, her work, and she pours her energy there, rather than into raging at the parts she can't, like the basic fact that squirrels aren't meant to live in the ocean. There's wisdom in that division of effort. Spend yourself on what you can change. Make your peace with what you can't, and don't confuse the two. And she brings something to the group that none of the others have, which is competence of a very grounded kind. SpongeBob has joy, Patrick has peace, Squidward has his tortured art, Mr. Krabs has his money, Plankton has his obsession, Sandy has capability. She's the one who can actually build the thing, fix the thing, fight the thing. In a world of dreamers and drifters and schemers, she's the one with her feet on the ground, or as close to the ground as you can get inside an air dome under the Pacific. And there's a dignity in that. The friend who can actually do things, who shows up with skills instead of just feelings. I think Sandy is easy to underrate because she's not the funny one, and she's not the sad one. She's the steady, sensible, capable one, and steady doesn't grab you the way misery or mania does. But she's quietly one of the most admirable creatures in the show. A reasoning mind that chose community over comfort, that built a life in a place that fights her every day, and that keeps choosing that life, helmet and all, out of love. If you're the odd one out wherever you are, and a lot of us feel that way more than we let on, Sandy's the one to think about. Not the outsider who stayed cold and separate, the outsider who dove in anyway, and belonged and never stopped missing home and stayed regardless. That's a fuller way to be the stranger in the room. Feet on the ground, helmet on, all the way in. Let's slow right down for a bit and talk about the quieter characters, the ones who fill in the edges of the world. Because a place doesn't feel real because of its heroes. It feels real because of its background, the small recurring rhythms that make it a home rather than a stage. Start with Gary. Gary is SpongeBob's pet snail, and snails in Bikini Bottom are basically cats, so Gary meows. That's the joke, and it never stops being funny to me. A snail that meows. He's mostly silent, he's slow, he leaves a trail, he does snail things, and yet Gary is, in a surprising number of episodes, the wisest character in the room. There's a running thread where Gary quietly understands, more than SpongeBob does, sees situations clearly, and would fix everything if only he could talk properly, which he can't, because he's a snail. He communicates in meows and the occasional profoundly disappointed look. There's something lovely in that, the wisdom of the household pet. Anyone who's lived with an animal knows the feeling, the sense that the creature has your number, that it watches you make your daily mistakes with a kind of patient, unbothered clarity. Gary is that turned up slightly. He can't intervene, so he mostly just abides. He's there when SpongeBob leaves in the morning and there when he comes back, a fixed warm point in the day. And when SpongeBob neglects him, which happens, the show treats it as a genuine small betrayal, because a pet's whole world is you, and forgetting that is a real failing, even if the pet is a snail that says meow. There's a whole quiet ethic in how you treat a creature that depends on you entirely and can't argue back. SpongeBob usually, eventually, gets it right. Then there's Mrs. Puff, and Mrs. Puff breaks my heart a little. Honestly, Mrs. Puff runs the boating school, which is the underwater version of a driving school, and SpongeBob is her student. Has been apparently forever. He cannot pass. He is by any measure one of the most enthusiastic, well-meaning, hard-working creatures in the sea, and he is a catastrophe behind the wheel of a boat, and he has failed Mrs. Puff's test more times than anyone can count. This is one of the show's oldest running jokes. SpongeBob still walking everywhere because he still hasn't got his license, but sit with it from Mrs. Puff's side for a second, because that's where it gets quietly poignant. Here is a teacher whose entire job is to get students to pass, and she's been handed the one student who never will, and who she will therefore have in her class, failing cheerfully, apparently for the rest of her natural life. She's not dealing with a lazy student or a rude one. She's dealing with her nicest, keenest, most hopeless pupil, and there's no escape from it. She's fond of him, and she dreads him in equal measure, and both feelings are completely justified. It's its own small loop of the absurd, if you like, the boulder we talked about earlier, wearing a different hat. Mrs. Puff pushes SpongeBob toward a license, he rolls right back down the hill, and tomorrow she does it again. Except unlike SpongeBob at his grill, Mrs. Puff has not made her peace with the repetition. She's just trapped in it. And you feel for her. There's a real philosophy of teaching buried in Mrs. Puff, actually. The limit of what a teacher can do. She can be as good at her job as she likes, and some students, through no malice, simply won't get there. And she has to keep showing up anyway. Keep believing this might be the time. Keep her patience mostly intact. There's a quiet heroism in the caring professions that the show accidentally captures here. The people who pour effort into outcomes they can't guarantee and have to make peace with trying rather than succeeding. Mrs. Puff mostly manages it. Mostly. Everyone has their limit, and SpongeBob's boating has found hers more than once. And then there's the whole texture beyond those two. The regulars. The fish who fill the Krusty Krab. The lifeguard at the lagoon. The specific rhythm of a Bikini Bottom day. Work at the crab. Jellyfishing after. Home to Gary. Up and do it again. It's a small life, repeated. And I think one of the reasons the show is so comforting, one of the reasons it works at this hour, is that it's built on repetition that feels safe rather than trapping. You always know roughly where everyone will be. SpongeBob will be at the grill. Squidward will be miserable at the till. Gary will be home. Sandy will be in her dome. There's a permanence to it, a sense that the world will still be arranged the way you left it. And that permanence is deeply soothing, especially to a child. And if we're honest, especially to a tired adult at 1 a.m, there's a thing about familiar television that's genuinely true, that returning to a world where you know all the furniture is calming in a way that new and exciting things simply aren't. Your brain gets to relax because nothing is going to surprise it. Bikini Bottom is one of the most familiar, fictional places there is. Hundreds of visits, always more or less the same handful of characters, in the same handful of buildings, living the same shape of day. It's not stagnation, it's stability. And these smaller characters, the meowing snail, the long-suffering driving instructor, the background fish, are what make that stability feel populated and warm rather than empty. We don't spend much time thinking about the Garys and the Mrs. Puffs. They don't carry the philosophy the way SpongeBob or Squidward do, but they carry the world. They're the reason it feels like somewhere real, somewhere you could almost live, somewhere that would still be there, arranged just so, if you swam back tomorrow. And most of a life, if you think about it, is made of exactly this. Not the big dramatic beats, the small recurring rhythms, the pet at the door, the familiar faces in the familiar places, the same gentle loop, day after day. It's easy to overlook. It might be most of what home actually is. Since we're on the shape of a Bikini Bottom day, let's talk about what SpongeBob does when he's not at the grill. Because the work matters, we spent a whole section on it, but the play might matter just as much. And it's a different kind of thing entirely. SpongeBob's great hobby is jellyfishing. He and Patrick take nets and go out to the fields and chase jellyfish, which are like a cross between insects and, well, jellyfish, and which sting like anything. And that's it. That's the whole activity. You catch a jellyfish, maybe you get some jelly, mostly you just chase them about and get stung and have a wonderful time. There's no goal beyond the doing. You don't win jellyfishing. You don't level up. It produces nothing. It leads nowhere. And it is, for SpongeBob, one of the great joys of existence. Then there's bubble blowing, which he approaches with the seriousness of an Olympic sport. There's a whole technique to it, a little routine of movements, and he'll produce these enormous, elaborate bubble creatures with total commitment. Again, entirely pointless, again entirely joyful. And I think these two activities, the jellyfishing and the bubbles, are doing something important in the show that's easy to walk past. Because we're conditioned to think of hobbies as the filler between the important stuff. The important stuff. That phrase is the whole problem, really. There's an idea, and you find versions of it in Aristotle and in a lot of thinkers since, that we've got the relationship between work and leisure backwards. We tend to think leisure exists to serve work. You rest so you can labour better. You take the weekend so you can survive the week. The play is in service of the productivity. But the older view flips it. It says the work exists to serve the leisure. That the whole point of doing your job, of keeping the lights on, is so that you can then have the free, unforced, purposeless time in which the best parts of being alive actually happen. On this view, leisure isn't the reward for the real living. Leisure is the real living. The work is just what buys it. And I don't mean leisure in the sense of collapsing exhausted in front of a screen, though there's a place for that too. I mean the active, chosen, delighted in kind. The thing you do purely because doing it is good, that produces nothing and proves nothing. Jellyfishing, blowing bubbles, the stuff that has no justification beyond the fact that it's a pleasure. SpongeBob has that in abundance, and crucially, he doesn't treat it as lesser than his work. He brings the exact same total attention to a bubble as he brings to a patty. The play is not a lower activity for him, it's just another place to be completely present. There's an episode that pokes at all this rather beautifully. SpongeBob decides he's had enough of society entirely, quits his job, gives up his possessions, and goes off to live out in the jellyfish fields, wild and free, just him and nature, and no responsibilities. Pure freedom. And it's a disaster, but not in the way you'd expect. He's not defeated by the elements or anything dramatic. He just slowly misses his life. He misses his job. He misses his friends. He misses his snail. He misses the shape of his ordinary days. And he comes home. The lesson isn't that freedom is bad. It's subtler than that. It's that the free time only means something against the backdrop of a life you're actually part of. Total freedom, with nothing to return from and nothing to return to, turns out to be a bit empty. The play is sweet precisely because it's woven into a life that also has work and friends and a home. Cut it loose from all that, and it stops being play and starts being just drifting. I think about that a lot, honestly. There's a fantasy a lot of us carry. The escape fantasy. The one where you quit everything and go and be free somewhere with no obligations. And SpongeBob went and did it and found out what the fantasy leaves out, which is that a person mostly wants freedom in doses, held inside a structure, not freedom as a permanent condition. He wanted the jellyfishing and the job, the afternoon of pointless play and the morning of work he loves, not one without the other. The two hold each other up. And then there's the childlike thing, which I've been dancing around this whole time, and should probably just say, SpongeBob is, essentially, a child. Not literally, he has a job and a house, and pays no rent to anyone as far as I can tell, but in his orientation to the world, he's a child, in the best possible sense. He's delighted by small things. He plays with total absorption. He finds wonder everywhere, and takes almost nothing for granted. The voice actor who plays him has said he thinks of the voice as something between a child and an adult, a sort of child man, and that's exactly right for the whole character. Not just the voice. We tend to treat childlikeness as something you're supposed to grow out of. Getting serious, we call it. Growing up. And obviously some of that is necessary. You can't pay your bills with wonder, but I think we throw out far more than we need to. The capacity to be genuinely delighted by a bubble is not childish in the bad sense. It's a skill, and it's one most adults have quietly let wither, and SpongeBob has kept it fully alive. He's proof that you can hold down a job and a home and a whole adult life and still lose your entire afternoon to chasing jellyfish and mean it. The wonder isn't the opposite of the responsibility. He's got both, side by side, neither one embarrassed by the other. So the play matters, not as a break from the real business of life, but as some of the realest business there is. The purposeless, delighted, childlike hours. The ones that produce nothing and are worth everything. If SpongeBob has a secret beyond loving his work, it's that he never grew out of loving his play either. Both fully, all the way. That's a rarer combination than it sounds. We've gone through the characters one by one. Now I want to step back and talk about the show as a whole, and the thing it does that I think is quietly its deepest quality, deeper even than any of the individual philosophies we've walked through. It's the thing a critic pointed at right back at the start, when he called it a breath from before irony. I've been sitting on that phrase all night. Let's actually open it up. Think about the world SpongeBob arrived into, and the world it's still in. So much of our culture, especially the clever bits of it, runs on irony, on the knowing wink, on being a little bit above the thing you're doing, holding it at a distance, signalling that you're too smart to be caught actually meaning anything. It's a defensive posture, mostly. If you never fully commit, if you're always half joking, then nothing can really wound you, because you can always retreat into, well, I wasn't being serious. A huge amount of modern humour, modern conversation, modern everything is built on that hedge. Don't be caught caring too much. Caring is embarrassing. Sincerity is cringe. And into all that swims a square yellow sponge who has never had an ironic thought in his life. SpongeBob means everything. Every single thing he says and does, he means completely. When he's happy, he's all the way happy. No hedge, no wink, no distance. When he loves his job, he actually loves it, without a shred of self-awareness about how uncool that is. When he tells someone they're his friend, he means it entirely. There is no gap in him between what he feels and what he shows. He's the least ironic character imaginable, and I've come to think that's not incidental to why the show endures. I think it's the whole engine, because here's the strange power of it. Genuine sincerity, real unguarded meaning it, is almost shocking when you encounter it, precisely because we've built so much armour against it. It disarms people. It disarmed a whole cynical culture. That critic's point was exactly this, that because the show wasn't trying to be hip, it couldn't be made fun of in the usual way. You can't take the mickey out of something that's already completely open, that isn't defending anything, that has no pretension for you to puncture. SpongeBob is invulnerable to cynicism because he offers it nothing to grip. He's just openly, delightedly himself. And that turns out to be a kind of armour stronger than any amount of cool detachment. And the man who made him was the same way, which we touched on at the very start. Hillenburg wasn't a cynic. You don't spend years genuinely thrilled by tide pools if you're a cynic. The sincerity in the show is his sincerity. It's a scientist's honest delight in the actual world, poured into a character who delights in his actual world just as honestly. The naivety was deliberate, the critic said, and I think that's the key word, deliberate. It's not that the show doesn't know irony exists, it's that it chose, on purpose, to be earnest instead, to risk being uncool in exchange for being true. That's a braver artistic choice than it looks, and it's aged far better than most of the winking, too clever stuff that came out alongside it. Here's the piece of it that moves me most, and it involves Squidward again. So we've come full circle in a way. SpongeBob is endlessly, relentlessly kind to Squidward, and Squidward is, for the most part, horrible back. He's dismissive, he's cutting, he wants nothing to do with him. And it changes SpongeBob not one bit. He keeps offering the friendship, keeps being warm, keeps genuinely wanting Squidward to be happy. With no scoreboard, no resentment building up, no eventual, well, if that's how you're going to be. He just keeps meaning it. And that's not stupidity, though it would be easy to read it that way. It's a kind of moral stubbornness, a refusal to let someone else's coldness dictate the temperature of his own heart. There's real philosophy in that, the idea that your kindness shouldn't be a transaction, shouldn't be contingent on being repaid. Most of us are kind conditionally. We're warm to the people who are warm back, and we cool off pretty quickly when we're not getting anything in return. SpongeBob's kindness isn't conditional on anything. It's just what he is, pointed at whoever's in front of him, whether they deserve it or want it or not. And over a long enough time, that kind of unconditional warmth actually does wear grooves in even the coldest character. Squidward never becomes a nice person exactly, but there are moments, real ones, where the sincerity gets through, where he's briefly, grudgingly touched by it. It works, slowly, the way water works on stone. I don't want to oversell a cartoon as a moral teacher. It's a comedy about a sponge, and it mostly wants to make children laugh. But I genuinely think the reason it's lasted, the reason it crossed over from a kids' show into something adults quote and love and return to, is this sincerity underneath it. In a culture that got more and more ironic, more and more defended, more and more afraid of being caught caring, here was this one thing that just openly cared about burgers, about friends, about bubbles, about being alive. And it never got embarrassed about it. Not once. There's something quietly steadying in that, which is maybe why we've ended up here talking about it so late. The permission to just mean things, to not have to be clever or guarded or above it all, to love your daft little job and your daft little friends and your daft little hobbies openly, without the wink. Most of us can't quite manage it. We're too well armoured, too worried about how it looks. But it's a nice thing to sit near for a while. A creature who never learned the armour and turned out just fine without it. Better than fine. He turned out to be the happiest creature in the sea. Maybe the armour was never protecting us from as much as we thought. We started with the man who made all of this. And I said we'd come back to him at the end. So let's do that now. Gently. Steven Hillenburg made SpongeBob and then, in a sense, let it go. He directed the first film and originally meant it to be the end of the whole thing, a proper finish. But the show was too popular to stop, and the network wanted more, so he stepped back from running it while it carried on without him at the helm. He kept an eye on it, came back for the second film, stayed connected, but he'd made his peace mostly with the fact that the thing he'd created had grown far bigger than him and would keep going in hands other than his. There's a detail from that stretch that I find quietly telling. Hillenburg worried about the merchandising, all the toys, all the stuff, the endless plastic sponges. He apparently once said that his biggest nightmare was being at the beach one day and having one of the dolls wash up on the shore like garbage. Because of course it was. He was a marine biologist before he was anything else. The idea of his own creation ending up as ocean litter, polluting the exact thing he loved most, genuinely troubled him. He was never fully comfortable being the man at the centre of a merchandising empire. The tide pool teacher never entirely left the building. In 2017, he shared that he'd been diagnosed with ALS, the disease that slowly takes away a person's control of their own body while leaving the mind intact. It's a cruel one. He said he intended to keep working on the show for as long as he possibly could, and by all accounts he did. He died the following year, in late 2018, at 57, which is not old, which is not nearly old enough. And here's the part that gets me every time, the part where his whole life sort of rhymes with itself. His ashes were scattered in the ocean. The marine biologist, the man who fell for the sea as a teenager off a California beach, who taught children about the small creatures in the tide pools, who built his life's work out of his love for the water and then worried about protecting it, went back into the sea at the end, returned to the thing he'd loved the whole way through. You couldn't write it. Well, again, in a way he sort of did. He spent decades sending a little yellow ambassador down to the bottom of the ocean, and then he followed him down. The show, of course, kept going. It's still going now, years after he died. Hundreds of episodes, well past 300 of them, deep into its 17th season, with more already promised. New creatures, new stories, the same bright town at the bottom of the sea. There's something strange and lovely about that. A piece of art outliving its maker, and just carrying on, warm and daft and sincere, introducing itself to children who weren't born when he died and will never know his name. They'll just know the sponge. They'll know the theme song they somehow already knew, and a little of Hillenburg's honest delight in the world will pass into them without any of them realising where it came from. That's a kind of legacy that I think is worth sitting with, especially at this hour. Not a monument, not a statue or a grand design thing, just warmth propagated forward. He loved the ocean, and he made something joyful out of that love, and the joy kept spreading long after he was gone, into people who never met him, in a form none of them think of as his. Somewhere right now a child is laughing at a square sponge, and that laugh traces back, through a long invisible line, to a young man snorkeling off a beach and deciding the sea was the most interesting thing in the world. The love became a comic, the comic became a show, the show became a piece of the culture, and the culture handed it to a kid who just thinks it's funny. And it is funny. That was always part of the point. I keep thinking about the contrast between him and some of his own characters, actually. Mr. Krabs spent his life chasing a fortune he'd have burned for his daughter in a heartbeat. Plankton spent his chasing a formula that would never have filled the hole. Both of them aimed at the wrong thing and couldn't stop. Hillenburg aimed at the right thing more or less by accident, by simply making what he genuinely loved and refusing to be cynical about it. And the reward for that was a piece of joy that will outlast nearly everything else made in his lifetime. He didn't set out to build a legacy. He set out to draw sea creatures he found delightful. The legacy was just what happened when a sincere person made a sincere thing, and it turned out the world was starving for exactly that. There's no tidy lesson to close on, and I don't want to force one, because forcing one would be very un-SpongeBob of me. But if there's a thread running from the man to the sponge to us, lying here in the dark, it might be something like this. Make the thing you actually love. Mean it all the way. Don't armour up. Don't hold it at a distance. Don't wait for permission or worry about whether it's cool. A marine biologist made the least cynical thing on television out of nothing but honest delight, and it made the world a little gentler, and then he went back into the sea he came from. That's a good life. Quietly, it's about as good as they get. The sponge is still down there, flipping his patties, thrilled about all of it, and somewhere in the water around him, in a way that's more poetic than literal, but true enough for tonight, so is the man who dreamed him up. Both of them exactly where they wanted to be. At the bottom of the ocean, delighted, home. If you've stayed with me this far, and you're somewhere between awake and not by now, well, it's been a nice long wander, and I'm glad you came along for it. We've been all over Bikini Bottom tonight. We started with a marine biologist who couldn't decide between science and art, and stopped choosing, and we found a whole town of creatures, each carrying a different answer to the oldest question. There is, which is just, how do you do this? How do you be alive without it going wrong? SpongeBob answers it with total unironic delight in his work and his play and his friendships. Squidward answers it with a longing that never quite gets satisfied and a clarinet that almost helps. Patrick answers it by never asking the question at all. Sandy answers it with reason and karate and a helmet full of air. Mr. Krabs gets it backwards most days, and right in the one emergency that counts. Plankton chases a thing that would never have filled him even if he'd caught it. And Karen sits there, being quietly the best thing any of them has, largely ignored. None of them is completely right. That's what I like about it, thinking back over the whole thing. It's not a show with a single answer it wants you to swallow. It's a show that lays a lot of different lives side by side and lets you feel the shape of each one. And if you had to build a decent way of living out of the pieces, you'd probably take SpongeBob's sincerity and his attention, a bit of Patrick's ability to put the churning mind down, Sandy's willingness to dive all the way into a place that isn't built for you, Epicurus's friendships held at the very top of the pile, and a firm note to yourself not to end up like Plankton, staring across the road at something that was never the answer. That's not a bad recipe. Better than the Krabby Patty one, and nobody's keeping it secret. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, now that we're near the end. It would have been so easy for all of this to be nothing. A silly cartoon about a sponge, disposable, forgotten, and instead it turned out to be one of those rare things that a whole culture just absorbed, that outlived its maker, that a child today and a tired adult tonight can both find something in. And I don't think that happened because it was clever. Plenty of clever things vanish. I think it happened because it was sincere, all the way down, from the tide pool teacher who made it to the sponge he made. It meant everything it said. And meaning things, it turns out. Age is better than being clever about them ever will. There's a lot more down there we didn't get to, if I'm honest. Squidward alone could take a whole evening. The tragic artist, the near misses, the rare good nights. The films have their own strange philosophy, all boulders and identity, and a surprising amount about proving you're a man. There's a whole cast of smaller creatures we barely waved at. I've got half a mind to come back for some of them another time, if there's the appetite for it. We'll see. No promises, no big plans. That would be very unpatrick. But for tonight, I think we can leave it here. A bright town at the bottom of a deep ocean, built somehow on top of an old sadness, full of creatures getting on with their small lives as if the world were brand new. A sponge who loves his job, a snail at the door, a man who loved the sea so much he became part of it in the end. None of it fixes anything, of course. Nothing really does. But it's soft stuff to turn over as you go under, and soft is about all any of us are after by this end of the day. The water's calm down there. The lights of the little town are still on. SpongeBob's probably asleep by now too in his pineapple, with Gary somewhere nearby, ready to wake up tomorrow, thrilled about a burger, the way he always is, the way he always will be. There are worse things to drift off picturing. Sleep well, mind the jellyfish, and if you remember the theme song again on your way down, that's all right.